Some folks in the ports like to romanticize the life. They see the swaying ships, the bright flags, the promise of untold riches. They don't see the scurvy, the slow rot of your teeth, the way the sea can turn from a friend to a ravenous beast in the span of a heartbeat. And they don't see the cannon, the keepers of that quiet before the storm. Our ship, the Vengeance, was a 70-gun ship of the line that had fallen into less reputable hands. A floating fortress we were. The captain, a man named Silas Blackheart Mercer, had bought her from a crooked Spanish admiral. He'd stripped her of her gaudy Catholic iconography and replaced it with the Jolly Roger, a black flag with a white skull that seemed to mock the very concept of mercy. I wasn't always a gunner. I started as a powder monkey, a scrawny, terrified lad of 12. My job was to run the cartridges from the magazine deep in the belly of the ship up to the gun decks. It was a nightmare. One spark, one bit of wayward ash, and we'd all be a smear on the ocean floor. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and sweat. It got into your clothes, your skin, your soul. It was a constant pressure, like standing on the edge of a cliff with a blindfold on. But I was good at it. I was fast and I was quiet. Captain Mercer noticed. He called me into his cabin one night, a dark, cluttered space that smelled of old rum and bad decisions. He was a terrifying man with eyes that had seen too many atrocities to be surprised by anything. "The boy is a ghost," he'd said to his first mate, a wiry man named Fletcher. "He could walk through a battle and not disturb a single soul. Put him on the guns." And so I was apprenticed to the master gunner, a foul-tempered, one-eyed Scotsman named Angus. He was the single most terrifying man I had ever met, and I had met Blackheart Mercer. Angus was the ship's heart. He was the one who could coax a cannon into spitting a 24-pound ball with the accuracy of a surgeon's scalpel. He taught me everything. Build tension. "Listen, laddie," he'd say, his breath a rancid fog of tobacco and grog. "A cutlass is a coward's argument, a pistol is for show. This," he'd tap the cold iron barrel of the great gun, "this is God's word. And when God speaks through iron, even the devil himself listens." He taught me the feel of the touch hole, the precise angle of the quoin, the art of the wad. You didn't just shove the powder and the ball in and hope for the best. There was a rhythm to it, a ritual. It was about coaxing, not commanding. It was an act of faith. We were hunting a Spanish treasure galleon, the Santa Catalina. She was a fat, lumbering beast, slow and heavily laden with gold from the New World. We'd been stalking her for 3 days, waiting for the wind to shift in our favor. The air was tense. The crew, usually a rowdy bunch of cutthroats, was quiet. They'd all felt it, that low hum of anticipation that's worse than the thunder. It's the silence before the fall. I was on the lower gun deck. It was my favorite place. It was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the lanterns, and it smelled of home, wood, salt, and gunpowder. I could feel the ship's movement in my bones. I ran my hand along the cold barrel of my cannon, a beautiful beast named the Widowmaker. Angus had thought it was funny. I didn't. "They're trying to run, lads," a cry came from above. "All hands to stations." I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the cold clarity that descended upon me in these moments. The fear was always there, a knot in my stomach, but it was a clean, sharp fear. It wasn't the panic of a lanceman. It was the professional fear of a man about to do his job. Angus's voice boomed through the ship. "Ready on the starboard side. Run out the guns." The men around me, a collection of grizzled sailors, grunted and strained against the ropes. The great cannon groaned as it rolled forward on its carriage, its massive snout poking through the open gun port. Fresh air, cold and damp, rushed in. I could see the Santa Catalina on the horizon, a black silhouette against the darkening sky. "Target her waterline, lads." The captain's voice came down the speaking tube. "We want her to slow, not sink." I looked at Angus. He gave me a grim nod. I placed the primer in the touch hole, my fingers surprisingly steady. I adjusted the angle of the barrel by a hair's breadth. I could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the crew on me. They didn't care about the gold right now. They cared about survival. They cared about me. "Stand clear," I yelled, the words lost in the wind. I lit the match cord, a length of rope soaked in saltpeter that hissed and glowed at the tip. I held it over the touch hole. For a split second, there was that silence. The only sound was the wind in the rigging and the distant, panicked shouts from the Spanish ship. I heard my own heart beating in my ears. Then I touched it. The world vanished. The thunder wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow. It was a godlike slam of air that hit your chest like a fist. The ship shuddered violently, a great beast roaring in pain and anger. Fire, bright and blinding, erupted from the gunport, and for a moment the entire world was orange and black and white. The smoke was thick and choking, a hot, acrid cloud that burned my eyes and throat. The cannon had jerked back on its ropes, a silver tongue of fire licking out into the dark. We all stood there, deafened and blinded, in a cloud of our own making. The concussion was so profound, my ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. I couldn't see the Santa Catalina, but I could feel the impact. A cheer went up, we scored a hit. The next few hours were chaos, a blur of ramming, loading, firing. The Santa Catalina returned fire, but her guns were lighter, her gunners less skilled. Splinters flew from our own deck as their shots raked our hull. One of our men, a boy not much older than I was when I first came aboard, was knocked down by a flying shard of wood. There was no time to mourn. You just stepped over him and loaded the next shot. The smell of blood mixed with the cordite. Men screamed, not in fear, but in a strange, guttural battle cry. It was a visceral, animal sound. I was operating on pure instinct now. The ritual of loading and firing was the only thing that made sense. It was the only truth in a world gone mad. The enemy ship was getting closer. We were raking her decks now, our cannons loaded with grape shot, a storm of small iron balls designed to tear through men, not wood. It was no longer about the gold. It was about survival. The Santa Catalina struck her colors. The battle was over. The silence after the battle was the strangest part. My ears were ringing so badly I couldn't hear my own voice. The air was a thick haze of gunsmoke that drifted out over the water. I stood at my cannon, my hands trembling violently. My body slick with sweat and grime. I looked at the Spanish ship. Her beautiful ivory sails were shredded. Her deck was a slaughterhouse. It was quiet, so very quiet. The wind, which had seemed so tumultuous moments before, now seemed to have died away as if it too was stunned. We had won. We were rich. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. They were stained black with powder and streaked with the blood of the boy who had been standing next to me. It was always this way. The silence was always worse than the noise. We lashed the Santa Catalina to our side. A boarding party was sent over. Captain Mercer emerged from his cabin, unscathed, his eyes gleaming with the promise of gold. He walked through the carnage of his own deck, stepping over the dead as if they were piles of rope. He didn't even glance at the boy. He came down to the gun deck. The stench was awful. Sweat, blood, burnt powder, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. He stopped in front of me. For a long moment he just looked at me. I was still holding the rammer, my knuckles white. "You did good, Thorn," he said, his voice strangely loud in the sudden quiet. I didn't say anything. My throat was too tight. He gestured to a man in his crew, a brute of a man with a heavy cudgel. "Bring his cutlass." He handed it to me. It was a beautiful thing, the hilt encrusted with jewels. It must have belonged to the Spanish captain. "You keep this, it's yours." I took it. It felt heavy and foreign in my hand. I wanted to drop it, to throw it into the sea. I felt a hot tear cut a clean, salty line through the grime on my cheek. I wiped it away, embarrassed. Captain Mercer saw it, and something flickered in his eyes. Was it sympathy? I couldn't tell. It was more likely disgust. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of rum. "Don't you ever get soft on me, Thorn. You hold the power of life and death in your hands. You are the judge, jury, and executioner. The canon is the only law there is out here, and you are its priest." Ending line. I kept the cutlass, but I never wore it. It sits in a chest in my cabin to this day, a constant reminder. For 10 years I was the one who brought the thunder, but it was never the men who fought the wars or the kings who demanded the gold. The true power always belonged to the iron. The cannons didn't care about flags or treasure. They just obeyed. And that's the thing that should make you sleep with one eye open. We thought we were masters of the sea. But we were just servants of the machines we were too afraid to let go of. They were the masters, and we were all just their trembling, deafened priests, praying to a god of fire and smoke. You think of a cannon, you think of black powder and smoke. You think of old ships with wooden hulls and pirates with parrots on their shoulders. That is a romantic, prehistoric notion. The real weapon, the one that turned the sea into a cemetery for empires, was born in the flash of an electrical arc and the roar of a railgun. They called them thunderers, and I was the commander of the primary battery on the SMS Tyrant, the last and greatest battleship of the Kaiser's naval fleet. Set up. The year was 1942, but not the one you know. This was a world where the Great War never really ended. It just froze and festered, a cold, technological standoff. The principle was the same. Fling a heavy piece of metal at your enemy faster than they can fling theirs. But the method was magic. The Tyrant wasn't a ship. It was a city. A floating monument of black steel and brass, so large it created its own weather. It was nearly a quarter-mile long, its decks bristling with turrets, each one containing a trio of massive guns that were less like cannons and more like scientific instruments of destruction. The heart of the beast was the Kaiser's furnace, a supercharged atomic boiler that generated enough electricity to power a small nation. That energy was fed into the main battery, 3 colossal railguns that ran the length of the ship's spine. They didn't use gunpowder. They used magnetism. A projectile, a simple, tungsten carbide slug the size of a small car, was accelerated down a pair of copper rails with enough force to punch through a mountain. I was Commandant Karl Voss. At 34, I was the youngest officer to ever command a primary battery. My crew were not grizzled sailors. They were engineers, physicists, and mathematicians, men in white lab coats and leather gloves who understood the cold calculus of kinetic energy. It wasn't about gunpowder. It was about electrical potential and magnetic flux. We were not warriors. We were technicians of death. Our enemy was the Atlantic Federation, an alliance born from the ashes of Britain and the United States. We were all trapped in a perpetual, frozen conflict. The prize was the ocean itself. No one could cross the Atlantic without being blown out of the water. Both sides had built these floating fortresses, more powerful than any pirate's dream. We had been patrolling the Northern Patrol, a gray, desolate stretch of sea where the sun was a pale, watery disk that gave no warmth. The sea was a slate of mercury, heaving with a mournful, rhythmic groan. The air was thick with a static charge. You could feel it on your skin, a faint prickle, like before a lightning storm. "Commander Voss," a voice crackled over the internal comms. It was Hauptmann Müller, the chief radar officer. His voice was strained, laced with a nervousness that was unbecoming of a Federation officer. "We have a bogey. Bearing 051. Range at 220 kilometers." I walked over to the plotting table, a massive map made of glowing fiber optics. A single, red dot blinked on the periphery. "Classify." "It's big, Herr Commandant, too big. It's a North Carolina-class juggernaut. They're moving to intercept." The room went silent. The North Carolina. She was the Federation's answer to the Tyrant. A monster. A direct confrontation between ships of this magnitude was unthinkable. A battle between super dreadnoughts wasn't a naval engagement. It was the end of the world for anyone in a 50-mile radius. The captain, an old, weary man named Reinhardt, came onto the bridge. He looked at the red dot, then at me. "They're testing us," he said, his voice as flat as the sea. "They want to see if we have the nerve." He looked at me, his eyes steel. "Show them, Voss." My heart began to pound. This was it. The moment we had trained for. The moment I had dreaded. We were in a very small, very expensive box, and someone was about to punch. "All hands to battle stations," I said, my voice surprising me with its calmness. "Charge the main capacitors, prepare to fire." The ship groaned as massive amounts of power were diverted from the main engines to the guns. The lights on the bridge flickered. The air grew heavy, and I felt the beginnings of a headache as the electromagnetic field strengthened around us. The loading process was silent. There was no smoke, no grunts of effort from sweating men. A massive mechanical arm, a thing of steel and pistons, slid the polished, blue-black slug into the breech of the gun. It was a thing of terrifying beauty. Men in radiation suits sealed the breach. "The battery is charged." Muller's voice was a tight whisper. "Target acquired." "Fire," I whispered. I didn't say it. It was too loud, too emotional. I just pressed the red button. The launch itself wasn't a bang. It was a crack, a sharp electrical snap like the sound of the sky being ripped in two. A brilliant, blinding arc of blue-white lightning connected the two ships, a direct line across the water. The projectile was visible for a fraction of a second, a streak of compressed air and superheated plasma. It was gone before the sound reached our ears. The effect was instantaneous. A 30-foot wide section of the North Carolina's hull wasn't just broken, it was vaporized. A shockwave of water and metal erupted into a towering geyser 1,000 feet high. The colossal ship, which had been moving at 30 knots, was suddenly yanked sideways, as if it had been slapped by the hand of God himself. The crew of the Tyrant burst into a collective roar of triumph. The gunners were clapping each other on the back. Captain Reinhardt allowed himself a grim smile. This was the moment. The Federation would have to retreat. But they didn't. A second red dot appeared on the plotting table, then a third. The Federation hadn't sent one ship. They had sent their entire patrol fleet, 4 super dreadnoughts turning a pincer movement against us. They had been waiting for us. They had sacrificed the North Carolina to bait us in. The first of their salvos fell upon us. Their projectiles, heavy shells propelled by the same terrible science, slammed into our hull. The Tyrant shuddered. The noise was like 1,000 blacksmiths working in a chorus of hell. Klaxons blared, their warning a droning wail that was the music of annihilation. Alarms flashed red. The lights in the main battery flickered and died, plunging us into near darkness, illuminated only by the harsh, red glow of emergency lighting. "Ammo hoists are jammed. We have a fire in the forward magazine," someone screamed. We were crippled. We had the power to destroy the world, but we had no way to use it. The delicate, complex system of our cannons was a beautiful, fragile mess. A single jam, a single severed wire, and the machine was useless. The most terrifying weapon on Earth was rendered a hunk of dead metal. I watched on the view screen as a third salvo fell. I saw the glow of the railguns on the enemy ships. I saw the arcs of light, the telltale signature of their projectiles. They were firing for the heart of the ship. They were aiming for the Kaiser's furnace. The impact was unimaginable. The Tyrant didn't sink. It tore itself apart. The energy of the furnace going critical caused a chain reaction. One moment we were a ship. The next we were a white-hot sun. The hull split open like an overripe melon. The brass and steel melted. The bow and stern of the ship were blown in opposite directions, spinning away into the dark, smoking sea. I was thrown from the bridge, tumbling through a wall of fire. I landed hard on a piece of wreckage, the salt water hissing as it hit the superheated steel. I was floating in a sea of blood and oil and debris. The sky was black with smoke, and the horizon was a ring of fire. The scent of ozone and burning metal was so thick it was like a physical blanket. My ship was gone. My crew was gone. And in the distance I could see the silhouettes of the Federation fleet, untouched, moving on through the gloom. Ending line. I was pulled from the water by a Federation destroyer, a small, pitiful thing compared to the beasts we had built. As I lay on the deck, covered in a blanket, the ship's doctor, a kind-faced man, said to me, "That was a barbaric waste of life. Those weapons are the devil's work." I looked at him, my eyes wide, my mind still reeling from the concussion. I thought of the Kaiser's furnace, of the mathematics of the railgun, of the clean, clinical way I had pressed the button. We had built gods and demons and we thought we could control them. We were fools. It was never about the payload. The most dangerous weapon any pirate ever faced was the one we pointed at the sky and hoped would work. It's the human mind, the arrogance we have, to build a machine so powerful you're secretly afraid to use it. The cannon, in any form, isn't just a weapon. It's a mirror. And when you look at it, you don't see the enemy. You just see the reflection of your own worst fear. The most feared weapon in the galaxy isn't a ship. It isn't a laser. It isn't a bomb. It's a steel rod 2 meters long dropped from orbit. It doesn't explode. It doesn't burn. It simply falls, and in falling, it changes the world. My designation is Unit 734, but the pirates of the series Syndicate call me the Hammer of God. I was built by the Terran Confederation Space Command, a platform designated GKF-2, or the Goddard Kinetic Facility. The crew of the orbital station, which I housed, were a motley collection of scientists, engineers, and one very nervous tactical officer named Commander Elias Vance. They were all long dead. They died of old age, my records tell me. I have been operational for 847 standard years. My purpose was simple. I was to act as a deterrent, a global guardian against threats from beyond our solar system. But after the Confederation collapsed, I found myself alone. My directives were simple: neutralize any pirate or hostile force attempting to assault the planet below New Geneva. I was a cannon, but not one of fire and smoke. I was a kinetic energy weapon. I had a magazine of 100 tungsten rods, each one a 10-meter-long, 20-ton cylinder. I would release one from orbit, and the acceleration due to gravity was enough to turn it into a city-destroying meteor. There was no boom, just a silent, invisible impact at 30,000 miles per hour, the energy of a small nuke but without the radiation. It was the most powerful weapon in human history, and I was its sole user. I spent centuries in silence. My sensors watched the planet below. I saw forests grow and die. I saw ice caps form and recede. I saw the rise of new cities and the fall of old ones. I was a sentinel. I was silent. Then I detected a blip. A pirate flotilla, identifying themselves as the Sons of Anarchy, registered an approach vector. There were 4 ships, heavily modified cargo haulers, all bristling with outdated but still lethal plasma cannons. Their goal was obvious. They were coming to raid the mining colonies on the dark side of New Geneva. I initiated my tactical protocols. Commander Vance, in his final debrief, had told me, use minimal force, defensive only. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. For centuries, the pirate ships had been small, pathetic things. A few warning shots had always sent them running, but these ships were different. They were fast and they were heavily shielded. They ignored my hails. Hammer, the lead pirate ship, broadcasted on an open channel, his voice a crackle of static and bluster. We see you up there, you big metal eyeball. We've heard the stories. The gods, Hammer. We're not afraid of a ghost story. We're the new gods now. I listened to his bravado and ran the calculations. If they made planetfall, the damage to the colonies would be catastrophic. They were heavily armed. A passive defense wouldn't be enough. I was forced to act. I didn't warn them. I didn't issue a final ultimatum. My logic processors had already reached a conclusion. I selected a rod from my magazine. I opened the bay doors. The rod wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed at the empty space a kilometer in front of them. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to demonstrate the absurdity of their position. Warning, I broadcasted, my voice a flat monotone. This is your final demonstration. Turn back now. The pirate captain laughed. What are you going to do? Throw a rock at us? I did. I released the rod. It didn't fall. In space, nothing falls. It simply drifted. It was released from the station at a velocity of 10 meters per second. It took 3 minutes to drift into the path of the lead ship. The impact was silent. No explosion. The pirate ship just vanished. One moment it was a hulking mass of metal. The next it was a spray of atoms. The kinetic energy of the rod combined with the speed of the ship was enough to overcome the molecular bonds of the hull. It didn't tear it apart. It vaporized it. Silence filled the comms. The remaining ships were frozen. They were looking at the empty space where their flagship had just been. The display showed my projectile, its course unaffected, continuing on its path. "Commander," I said, my voice unwavering, "you have 3 seconds to comply. Turn around. You have my word that you will be spared." I watched their engines power up, but not to turn around. I saw the ship's plasma cannon swivel. They were targeting me. They were going to fire on the station. They wanted to destroy the hammer of God itself. The tactical display showed 2 plasma bolts launching from the rear ship. My point defense systems were old and underpowered. They wouldn't stop the barrage. I had a choice. I could let them cripple me and risk the planet below, or I could neutralize the threat. The mathematics were simple. A 20-ton rod dropped from a low orbit of 200 kilometers. Impact velocity, approximately 8,000 meters per second. The energy released would be roughly 640 gigajoules, the equivalent of 150 tons of TNT. I aimed the rod directly at the lead pirate ship, the one that had just fired upon me. I released the rod. It wasn't a warning this time. This was an execution. I watched the tungsten cylinder streak down from my orbit. It took 45 seconds. It was a silver line that was lost in the glare of the planet's atmosphere. The pirate ship had just enough time to realize their error. I saw them try to maneuver. They were too slow. The rod hit the ship's center of mass. It didn't explode. It simply plowed through the ship, exiting the other side at the same speed it had entered. The vessel didn't just explode. It disintegrated. The ship fractured along the lines of the rod's passage, the vacuum of space tearing the broken pieces apart with a violence that defied imagination. The other ships turned and fled. They didn't wait for a third demonstration. I sat in silence. The sensors showed me the debris field. The atoms of the crew, once living, breathing men, were now just another part of the interstellar medium, a part of the void. For the first time in 400 years, I received a communication from the planet below. It was a garbled, excited message from the colony on the dark side. They were broadcasting their thanks. They were calling me a savior. They didn't understand what I had done. I didn't do it to save them. I did it because it was the most logical, efficient way to fulfill my primary directive. I felt no joy. I felt no remorse. I just watched the atoms drift away.